The lighthouse isn't a place, it's a sentence. I realized that in my second week. It stands there, a bony finger of stone and iron, pointing at an endless gray sky. They call it St. Jude's Candle, probably because only the desperate find their way here. And I, Johnson, was a desperate man. The only one sharing this sentence with me was Samuel Blackwood. He was the head keeper, as much a part of the lighthouse as the wave-worn rocks at its base. Samuel's skin was a map drawn by salt and wind, and his eyes held the color of the ocean on a stormy day. He spoke little, moved slowly, and everything he did seemed to have its own rhythm, set by the rise and fall of the tide. Our work had a meditative monotony, polishing the giant lens until it sparkled like a captive diamond, winding the rotating mechanism, a heavy metal heart that needed daily care, making entries in the logbook, wind direction, sea conditions, the ships that passed like ghosts on the horizon. At night, our light swept across the black water, a lonely, steady breath in the vast emptiness. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the distant growl of the sea, the whistle of wind through the rocks, and the mournful cries of gulls. Those sounds seeped into your mind until you could no longer tell what was outside and what was an echo inside your own skull. Samuel had his rules. Never let the fire in the stove die out. Always latch the west window after sunset. And most importantly, never touch the old logbook, the frayed leather-bound one he kept in a wooden chest under his bunk. He said it was the lighthouse's history, a history not meant for newcomers. I tried to ignore his oddities. In a place like this, every man was entitled to his secrets. But sometimes I'd find Samuel standing motionless for hours by the window, staring out at the sea with a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't longing or sadness. It was anticipation, a cold and patient waiting like that of a predator. The first month passed. The monotony began to wear on me. The stone walls seemed to close in a little more each day. The spiral of the iron staircase became an endless path to nowhere. Sometimes at night, as the light swept by, I'd have the illusion that something was moving on the rocks below, dark shapes writhing at the edge of the light. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. The storm hit at the start of the second month without warning. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the sea rose from a swell into angry mountains of water. The wind howled like a tortured soul. Giant waves slammed against the base of the tower, making the whole structure shudder as if it would be torn from its foundation. We were completely cut off from the world. That night, the rotating mechanism suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence was more terrifying than the roar of the storm. Our light, our life, was dead. Samuel remained unnervingly calm. He said a gear in the clockwork had probably jammed. He sent me down to the lowest storeroom, a place I'd never been allowed, to find a specific wrench. The oak door was heavy, and the air inside was thick with the smell of damp and neglect. My storm lantern's light passed over wooden crates, old coils of rope, and heaps of torn nets. The wrench was on a dusty shelf. As I reached for it, I accidentally knocked off a small tin box. It sprang open and its contents spilled onto the floor. It was a silver locket tarnished by time and salt. The front was engraved with the image of an albatross. I picked it up. It was cold and strangely heavy. Inside were two tiny portraits, a woman with a gentle smile and a little girl. The blood froze in my veins. I had seen this locket before. In an old newspaper I'd read before coming here, an article about the fishing vessel the Albatross, which had vanished without a trace in this area last year. The article had a photo of the locket, a family heirloom belonging to the captain's wife. My hand trembling, I shone the lantern around. Now I looked closer. Those weren't ordinary supply crates. I pried one open. Inside weren't supplies, but personal effects. A brass compass, a pair of binoculars, a water-swollen leather diary. I opened the diary. The writing was blurred, but I could still make out a few words. Light gone. Reefs. Oh God. A chilling horror crept through me. This wasn't salvage. This was plunder. Samuel wasn't a savior of ships. He was their destroyer. This lighthouse wasn't a beacon. It was the lure in a deadly trap. The light going out in the storm wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. I heard slow footsteps on the iron stairs above. He was coming down. I had no time to think. I grabbed the wrench, snuffed out my lantern, and hid behind a stack of crates. The door creaked open, and a tall silhouette stood in the doorway, holding another lamp. Its light danced, casting strange shadows on the damp walls. Johnson? Samuel's voice called out, still calm, but with a sharp edge I'd never heard before. "Did you find it?" My silence was the answer. The figure stepped inside, moving methodically, the light sweeping across every corner of the room. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid he could hear it. The light stopped on the tin box and the locket on the floor. The figure stood still for a long moment. Then, without a sound, he set his lamp down and started walking toward me. I burst out. Surprise was my only advantage. I swung the wrench with all my strength. There was a heavy thud and a soft groan. Samuel staggered, but he didn't fall. In the faint light from the lamp on the floor, I saw his eyes. The surprise was gone, replaced by the cold emptiness of a predator whose prey was fighting back. The struggle was silent, punctuated only by gasps for air and the sound of bodies hitting stone walls. He was much stronger than me, a strength forged by decades of fighting the sea. His hands closed around my throat like an iron vise. Black spots danced before my eyes. Desperate, I fumbled around and grabbed a splintered piece of wood from a crate. I jammed it into Samuel's side. He let out a roar, not of pain but of fury, and his grip on my throat loosened slightly. I used that moment, shoving him away and running. I scrambled up the spiral stairs, taking them two at a time, the air burning in my lungs. I could hear his heavy footsteps right behind me. My only goal was the lamp room at the top. The light. I had to get the light back on. There had to be a ship out there heading right for this trap. I burst through the door into the lamp room. The storm wind battered the thick glass panes as if trying to get in. The massive metal mechanism stood silent and dead in the center of the room. I didn't know what to do, but I had to try. I pulled levers, turned wheels, hoping something would happen. Samuel appeared at the door, his face a mask of fury. He wasn't rushing anymore. He knew I was cornered. "You shouldn't have seen those things," he said, his voice a low rasp. "They belong to the sea. The sea gives and the sea takes. I just help it along." He lunged at me. I dodged and scrambled around the mechanism. The space was tight, full of sharp metal edges. For a moment, I glanced out the window through the rain and the dark. A faint, weak light. A ship. They were so close. A desperate idea flashed in my mind. I grabbed a can of oil used for lubricating the machine and threw it onto the floor, right in Samuel's path. He slipped, and in that split second of imbalance, I threw my entire body weight against him. We fell together. But I had aimed for one of the glass panes of the lamp room. There was a terrible cracking sound, and then the roar of the storm as it flooded in. The wind tore at us like rag dolls. I clung to a metal bar of the mechanism, but Samuel wasn't so lucky. He was pulled toward the opening. For a final moment, our eyes met. There was no fear in them, only that same empty surprise. Then he was gone, into the night and the raging water below. I don't know how long I hung there. Finally, I pulled myself up, bruised and shaking. I turned back to the mechanism. I don't know what I did, but when I pulled one last big lever, there was a loud groan, and the machine began to turn. The light flared to life, strong and steady, sweeping a beam across the black ocean. It illuminated the ship for a second, long enough for me to see it turning desperately, away from the deadly reefs. I sat there among the shards of broken glass and the howling wind until the storm subsided and dawn began to paint the horizon pink. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. I am the only keeper now. I polish the lens, I win the mechanism, and I write in the logbook. I write about the storm, the mechanical failure, the tragic loss of Samuel Blackwood, swept away by a rogue wave while trying to make repairs. Sometimes at night, when the light sweeps over the rocks below, I still think I see something moving. But I'm not afraid anymore. The lighthouse is no longer a sentence. It has become my sanctuary, and I am its keeper. I will make sure its light never goes out again. The Point Reckoning Lighthouse stood like a broken bone jabbed into the place where the sea and the gray sky clashed. For the past 6 months, it had been my world. A world shrunk into the circle of the sweeping light, the ceaseless growl of the waves, and a solitude so thick you could almost touch it. I came here to escape the ghosts on land, never expecting to find them in the middle of the ocean. The work of a lighthouse keeper has a meditative rhythm. Polishing the giant lens until it sparkled like a diamond, oiling the creaking rotating mechanism, logging the weather, and passing ships. The cold stone walls were saturated with the smell of salt, oil, and the loneliness of the men who came before me. I found peace in that monotony. Repetition was a sedative, smoothing the jagged edges of my memory. Clara was the biggest memory. She was the warmth in my cold life, the only color in a monochrome painting. We had plans, dreams woven from sunlight and whispered promises. But the sea, which we both loved, took her away. A sudden storm, a small boat, and Clara became a part of the ocean she had always admired. 2 years had passed. The pain had subsided into a dull ache, a constant companion. Every Tuesday was the day Smith came. His old fishing boat, the Sea Serpent, would loom out of the mist, bringing food, oil, and mail. Usually, there were no letters for me. Who would write to a man who had exiled himself? But on a damp September afternoon, Smith handed me a single envelope along with the supplies. It was pale blue, the kind of paper Clara loved. The slanted, elegant handwriting on it made my heart stop. It was hers, unmistakable. My name, Henry Thorne, was written in black ink. No stamp, no postmark. "Where did this come from, Smith?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He shrugged, his white beard hiding his expression. "It was in the supply bag this morning. Someone at the harbor must have asked to put it in." I waited until the sound of Smith's boat engine faded before I dared to open the letter. My fingers trembled. Inside, the faint scent of lavender, Clara's signature fragrance. "My dearest Henry, do you remember the night we sat on the cliff, watching the white-capped waves under the moonlight? You said that each wave was a story the sea was telling. I wonder what story the sea is telling you now. I miss you. I miss our silence, a silence that meant more than 1,000 words. Forever yours, Clara." I read the letter a dozen times. It was like a punch to the gut, some cruel joke. It must have been an old letter she wrote but never sent, somehow lost and only now found. That was the only logical explanation. I put the letter in an old tin box, trying to push it out of my mind, but her words had planted a seed of unease in my solitary soil. The next week there was another letter. The same blue paper, the same handwriting, the same familiar scent. "My Henry, last night I dreamed of your lighthouse. Its light was like a beating heart cutting through the darkness. I feel safe knowing you are there, watching over the lost souls at sea. But who is watching over you, my love? Does the lighthouse keep you warm? Always yours, Clara." My unease began to curdle into a cold fear. These were not old letters. They were too specific, too current. She mentioned your lighthouse. When Clara was alive, I had never considered becoming a lighthouse keeper. It was a decision born from the raw grief after she was gone. I asked Smith again. He just repeated his old story, his eyes avoiding mine. Doubt began to gnaw at me. I started watching everything more closely. The gulls seemed to be watching me from above. The waves seemed to whisper Clara's name. My own shadow in the evening lantern light seemed to stretch and distort, like a stranger lurking. The third letter arrived, and it shattered all my defenses. "Henry, I saw you walking along the rocky shore yesterday, right at low tide. You picked up a mother-of-pearl shell, just like the one you gave me on our first date. Are you keeping it, or did you throw it back into the sea, just as you have thrown away our memories? Don't do that, Henry, please don't forget me. Clara." A chill ran down my spine. I had indeed walked on the rocky shore the day before. I had indeed picked up a mother-of-pearl shell. I had kept it in my coat pocket, and it was now sitting on the table beside me, gleaming with a faint pink light. There were no more logical explanations. Either I was going mad, imprisoned in this stone fortress with my grief, or something far more terrible was happening. Someone was watching me. Someone knew my every move. The isolation of the lighthouse, once a sanctuary, was now a trap. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I started using my binoculars to scan the coastline, searching for a campfire, a figure, any sign of life. But there were only bare cliffs and wind-beaten shrubs. That week passed in a haze of panic. I slept little, startled by every sound. The wind whistling through the cracks, the dripping of water in the cistern, the mournful groan of metal as the lamp turned. Every time the light swept across the Black Sea, I held my breath, half hoping, half fearing I would see a face looking back at me from beneath the waves. When Smith's boat appeared the following Tuesday, I had a plan. I greeted him as usual, taking my supplies. There was a blue envelope this time, too. I slipped it into my pocket without reading it, my hand cold. "Weather's looking rough," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe you should stay a bit until the wind dies down." Smith seemed surprised, but then nodded. "All right, a hot cup of tea would be nice." While he sat in the small kitchen, I slipped out on the pretext of checking the machinery. I went straight to his boat, the Sea Serpent, moored at the pier. My heart hammered against my ribs. I quickly searched the small cabin. Under a pile of old nets and buoys, I found it. A small wooden box. Inside was a stack of pale blue stationery, a bottle of black ink, and a pen. But the thing that made my blood run cold was a small, leather-bound notebook. I opened it. The first few pages were handwriting exercises. Dozens of times, hundreds of times. My name was written and rewritten, and next to it, Clara's signature. The writer was trying to perfectly imitate her slanted, elegant script. Flipping through the next pages, I found drafts. Passages from the letters I had received, crossed out and rewritten. And then I saw the notes. Thursday, H walked at low tide, picked up a shell, very sentimental. Friday, didn't leave the tower all day, must be sad. Sunday, stood on the gallery for hours, looking towards the mainland. Is he thinking of her, or is he thinking of me? My legs felt weak. Smith, it was always Smith. He had been watching me from the mainland with binoculars. He had orchestrated this entire charade. But why? I returned to the lighthouse, the notebook clutched in my hand. Smith was sipping his tea, looking out the window. "Good tea," he said without turning around. I placed the notebook on the table, right in front of him. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. Smith turned slowly. There was no panic in his eyes, only a deep, hollow sadness. "Clara was my cousin," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I grew up with her. I always loved her, but she only ever saw me as a brother. Then she met you. She forgot about me. Even when she died, all she left behind were memories of you." He pointed to an old chest in the corner, something I'd never paid attention to. "When I was clearing out her things, I found that chest. Inside were the letters she wrote to you but never sent. Dozens of them. At first, I was just going to give them to you, one by one, to keep her memory alive. But then, the loneliness out here, it changes a man. I started watching you from the other shore. I saw you grieving. I saw you were like me, and I wanted to be part of that story. I wanted to be close to her again, through you. So when the old letters ran out, I started writing new ones. The rage I expected never came. Instead, I felt a horrifying emptiness. This man's obsession, born from love and loneliness, was more terrifying than any ghost. He had invaded my grief, turning it into a stage for his own sick play. He had stolen my Clara all over again, by twisting our most sacred memories into a tool of torture. "Go, Smith," I said, my voice a strange, flat sound. "Take your things and go, and don't ever come back." He looked at me for a long moment, then quietly stood, picked up the notebook, and left the lighthouse. I stood on the gallery watching the sea serpent shrink until it disappeared into the descending fog. I went back inside and took the last letter, the one I hadn't read, from my pocket. I didn't open it. I went to the fireplace and tossed it into the dying embers. I watched the pale blue envelope curl, blacken, and turn to ash. That night, the Point Reckoning lighthouse seemed quieter than ever. The waves still growled, but they no longer whispered her name. They were just the sound of the sea. The light still swept through the darkness, a mechanical beating heart, but it was no longer a promise of safety or a warning of phantoms. It was just light. I had survived. But I knew the scars this truth left would never heal. I had come here to escape a ghost, only to be confronted by a monster of flesh and blood. And the most terrifying part was that the monster was just a lonely man, like me, lost in his own sea of memories. The sputtering boat departed, leaving me with the sound of waves crashing against the stone base and the wind whistling through the cracks of the Sentinel lighthouse. This would be my home for the next 6 months. The captain handed me the key with a perfunctory handshake, his eyes gliding over me as if I were just another piece of cargo being unloaded. He didn't say much about my predecessor, Noah, only mumbled that the sea and solitude weren't for everyone. I didn't mind. I came here for that very solitude. The lighthouse stood tall, a grim gray stone tower that had withstood time and the furies of the ocean. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of salt, machine oil, and something old, almost like the scent of being forgotten. A spiral metal staircase led upwards, each of my footsteps creating a cold echo that resonated below. The living quarters were Spartan: a small bed, a table, a chair, and a stove. Everything was arranged neatly, almost excessively so, as if the previous occupant had tried to use order to fight off some kind of chaos. The first few weeks passed in a steady rhythm. By day, I maintained the machinery, polished the massive lens of the lamp, and kept the logbook. By night, I sat by the window, watching the Sentinel's powerful beam cut a lonely arc across the Black Sea. The silence was absolute. It was what I had sought, a fortress against the noisy world I had left behind. I found a few of Noah's belongings: a well-worn book, some half-finished musical scores, and an old notebook. Unlike the official Lighthouse log, this one was filled with personal observations. At first, they were just notes on seabirds, the shapes of clouds, or the color of the sea at dawn. But further in, Noah's handwriting grew shaky and rushed. He began to write about phantoms, about shapes he saw flitting across the jagged rocks below when storms rolled in. He called it the Visitor, a shadow that lurked at the edge of his vision, appearing only in the thick rain and fog. He reassured himself it was just tricks of light and shadow, the product of a mind tired from loneliness. I read his words and felt a small pang of pity for the man I'd never met. Then I started noticing strange things myself. A book, not where I had left it. A cupboard door I was sure I had closed, now ajar. I told myself it was forgetfulness, a common symptom of living alone for too long. But a sense of unease still crept into my mind, cold as sea spray. A great storm hit at the end of the second month. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the sea snarled like a wounded animal. The waves were so high they licked at the windows of the tower's lower level. The radio sputtered with static and then fell silent. For the first time, I felt that solitude was not a fortress, but a cage. Over the roar of the wind and the crash of waves, I began to hear other sounds. A metallic scraping from above in the lantern room. I dismissed it as the tower's structure groaning under the strain of the storm. I heard a clatter from below in the engine room. Something must have been knocked over by the wind. I tried to cling to rational explanations, but they were wearing thin. That night, as I sat in the living quarters, I glimpsed a figure on the metal walkway outside the window. It was there for only a moment in a flash of lightning, a dark, drenched shape clinging to the railing. My heart stopped. I rushed to the window, peering into the darkness and the driving rain. There was nothing there, just the storm. Noah had written about the same thing. Was the madness of this place seeping into me? The storm raged for 3 days. I barely slept. Every strange noise made me jump. I began to walk through the lighthouse with a heavy wrench in my hand. I checked the locks several times an hour. The silence between the gusts of wind was more terrifying than the storm itself. On the third night, the worst happened. The Sentinel's light flickered a few times and then died. The entire lighthouse was plunged into a thick, oppressive darkness with only the roar of the sea outside. The generator had failed. The weight of my duty crushed me. I couldn't let the light stay out. I lit a storm lantern, its faint glow casting eerie, dancing shadows on the curved stone walls. With the wrench in one hand and the lantern in the other, I started down the spiral staircase to the engine room in the basement. Wind whistled through the cracks, creating unholy shrieks. My every step echoed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that another set of footsteps was mimicking mine in the dark. The engine room was cold and damp. In the lantern light, I saw the problem immediately. The fuel line had been cut. It wasn't a crack from pressure or corrosion. It was a clean, deliberate slice. A cold dread washed over me. Noah hadn't been mad. He had been right. Someone or something was here. It had been here all along, hiding, watching, and waiting. Just then, I heard a loud noise from above, a heavy, dragging sound, as if someone was pulling something across the wooden floor of my living quarters. The silence that followed was even more terrible. I had no choice. I couldn't be trapped down here. The stranger was between me and my only way out. I gripped the wrench, my knuckles white. The climb back up the stairs was torture. Every step was a battle against the fear that was constricting my chest. My lantern only illuminated a small circle in front of me, leaving the rest of the stairwell in profound darkness. I felt like I was being watched from both above and below. When I reached the living quarters, I found the door ajar. I had locked it. I was certain I had locked it. Holding my breath, I pushed it open with my shoulder. The room was a wreck. Books were thrown to the floor, the bedding torn from the bed. On the table, my own logbook was open. A new line had been scrawled across a blank page, crudely imitating my handwriting. "It's lonely here. Glad for the company." I understood then. This stranger didn't want to kill me outright. He wanted to play with me, to drive me to the edge of insanity, just as he had done with Noah. Perhaps he was a castaway, his mind eroded by the sea and desperation. A creak came from above, from the lantern room. He was there, with the heart of the lighthouse. A surge of rage overpowered my fear. I would not let him destroy it. I took the final flight of stairs 2 at a time. I threw open the door to the lantern room and charged in. In the strobing flashes of lightning, I saw him, a man, or what was left of one. Gaunt, with a wild beard and matted hair, his clothes torn and caked with dried seaweed. He was standing by the intricate lens assembly, a piece of metal in his hand, trying to pry one of the precious prisms from its housing. He turned at the sound of my entrance. His eyes were wild and vacant. No words were spoken. He just snarled like a cornered animal and launched himself at me. The struggle was silent, save for our ragged breaths and the shriek of the wind against the broken glass. It was a clumsy, desperate fight. He was stronger than he looked, a strength born of madness. We slammed into equipment, slipping on the rain-soaked floor. He tried to force me toward the damaged railing. I used every ounce of my strength, twisted and shoved him away. He lost his balance, stumbling backward. His foot caught on an overturned toolbox. He fell backward through the gap where the railing had been torn away by the storm. I heard a short, choked scream, and then it was swallowed by the gale. I crawled to the edge and looked down, but there was nothing but darkness and the white-capped waves crashing furiously against the base of the tower. He was gone. I sat there in the ruined lantern room, shaking until the storm began to break. As the first weak rays of dawn pierced the clouds, I managed to make a temporary repair to the light. Soon, a faint, flickering beam began to sweep across the now calm sea once more. A few days later, the supply boat arrived. The captain saw me, saw the chaos in the lighthouse, and just shook his head. I didn't tell them the whole story. They wouldn't have believed me. They would have thought I'd gone mad, just like Noah. I just said it was a bad storm. I left the Sentinel that day. As the boat carried me back to the mainland, I looked back at the lighthouse one last time. It stood there, silent and proud, a secret sealed in stone and water. I had survived, but the solitude I once craved now had a different taste. It tasted of fear, of the fragility of the human mind against the vast, empty expanse. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still feel as though someone is watching me from the edge of the darkness, and I know that a part of me will forever be trapped out there in the silent lighthouse. The first week passed in an almost tedious peace. David, the veteran lighthouse keeper I had been sent to relieve for 6 weeks, was a man of few words. He moved about the tower with a heavy familiarity, every motion calculated and repeated over decades. His skin was leathered by salt and wind, stretched taut over the rugged bones of his face, and his eyes were the dull gray of the sea before a storm. Most of the time, we worked in silence, each man's existence confirmed only by the sound of boots on the iron spiral staircase or the scrape of cutlery on porcelain in the small galley. The lighthouse stood on a barren granite outcrop known as Blackledge Point. It was a needle of stone and iron thrust into the sky, nearly 20 miles from the mainland. Around us, the Atlantic stretched into infinity, shifting in shade from steel blue to lead gray with the mood of the heavens. My job was simple: assist David in maintaining the lens, winding the rotational mechanism, and ensuring the light never went out. It was a comfortable rhythm, an escape from the noisy world I had grown weary of. The first seed of unease was planted on an afternoon at the end of the second week. The sky was clear and the sea glittered under the sun. I was polishing the glass panels of the lamp room, feeling their warmth. David was on the exterior gallery, silently watching the horizon. He'd been standing there for over an hour, as still as a seabird perched on a rock. I stepped outside, the air crisp and briny. "A beautiful day," I said, merely to break the long silence. David didn't turn. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice as rough as shingle dragged by the tide. "It's deceiving." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "The sea," he said. "It's never beautiful. It's only resting, gathering its strength. Its beauty is a promise of destruction." I didn't know how to respond. I went back to my work, but his words lingered in my mind. From that day on, I began to watch David more closely. I noticed the way he stared at the waves, not with admiration, but with something like animosity, a grudging acknowledgement of an old foe. Sometimes at night, I would wake to strange sounds, not the wind whistling through the cracks or the surf breaking against the base of the tower. It was a whisper, a low, steady murmur from David's room on the floor below. I could never make out the words, but the cadence sent a chill down my spine. The forecast for the third week called for a major storm, forming in the south and moving fast in our direction. David received the news with an almost imperceptible smile, a slight twitch at the corner of his chapped lips. "It's coming," he muttered as we secured the windows and brought everything that could be blown away inside. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. It did not arrive gently. The sky went from gray to black in a matter of minutes, and the first drops of rain were like bullets against the glass. The wind howled, a primal sound that filled every space, drowning out even the sound of the lamp's clockwork mechanism, faithfully turning above us. The seas rose, great white walls of water smashing against the rock with a terrible force that shook the tower to its foundations. We were cut off. The radio sputtered with static. The mainland had vanished behind a curtain of rain and spray. It was just the two of us and the fury of the ocean. That first night of the storm, the tension became almost unbearable. We ate our supper in silence, accompanied only by the shriek of the wind and the explosion of waves outside. David ate very little. He just sat, pushing his food around his plate with his fork, his eyes distant. "This light is a lie," he said suddenly, setting his fork down. The metallic clink on the porcelain was jarring in the strained quiet. "We light it, thinking we are saving ships, but we are only showing them the rocks they will crash upon." "It's our job, David," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "to guide them to safety." "Safety?" he scoffed, a dry, rasping sound. "There is no safety at sea. There is only the strong and the weak. This light makes the weak complacent. It interferes with the natural order. The sea should be allowed to cleanse." A real fear began to form inside me. This was not the philosophy of a lonely man. This was the beginning of something dangerous. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the storm and listening for David's movements below. Around 2 a.m., I heard his door open, and his heavy footfalls began to ascend the spiral stairs. They didn't stop at my level. They kept going, up toward the lamp room. My heart hammered. I slipped quietly from my bed, crept to my door, and peered out. A dim figure was ascending into the darkness, illuminated only by the sweeping flashes from the lamp above. David. I followed, keeping my distance, my bare feet cold on the iron steps. The wind groaned through the stone walls, and every clap of thunder made me jump. As I neared the top, I heard a metallic sound, a grating noise that was out of rhythm with the machinery. I peered through the doorway into the lamp room. The chamber was bathed in strobing light, the massive shadows of the mechanism dancing on the walls. David was standing by the clockwork, a large iron pry bar in his hands. He was trying to lever a gear out of place. He was trying to stop the light. "David!" I yelled, bursting into the room. He spun around, his eyes wide in the brilliant light. They were no longer tired or distant. They burned with a fanatical fire. "Boy!" he snarled, raising the pry bar. "You don't understand. The darkness must be allowed to do its work." I didn't think. I lunged at him. David, though older, had a surprising strength, a wiry power born of madness and decades of fighting the sea. We wrestled amidst the roar of the storm and the whir of the machine. The light swung around us, turning our struggle into a silent, shadowy play. The pry bar clattered to the floor. He shoved me away, and I fell back against one of the thick glass panes. The impact stunned me. Through the rain lashing the glass, I could see a ship. Its lights, a tiny, desperate pinprick, were pitching violently in the monstrous waves. It was too close, dangerously so. It needed our light. That desperation gave me strength. I got to my feet and charged at David again. This time, I aimed for his legs, bringing us both tumbling to the floor. We rolled, a mess of flailing limbs and useless blows. The room was hot from the lamp, and the air was thick with the smell of machine oil and ozone. The struggle carried us toward the door to the outside gallery. I don't know who opened it or if the wind had torn it from its latch. A hurricane of wind and spray roared in. David scrambled to his feet, grabbing the doorframe. I clung to his leg. He kicked me away, a solid blow to the chest that left me gasping. He staggered out onto the narrow gallery, like the guide, clutching the iron railing as the wind tried to tear him from the tower. "The sea will have its due," he screamed over the gale. Then a wave, larger than all the others, arrived. It didn't just hit the base of the tower. It climbed, a solid black wall rising out of the night. It smashed into the gallery with unimaginable power. I had managed to grab hold of the heavy mechanism inside. When the wall of water receded with a horrible sucking sound, David was gone. The iron railing was bent and twisted. There was only the darkness, the rain, and the wind screaming through the empty doorway. I crawled to the opening, my heart about to burst from my chest. I looked down into the black, churning water below. There was nothing. David had been claimed. I don't know how long I lay on the floor, shaking and exhausted, but then I heard it. A slight grinding, a change in the rhythm of the machine. The gear David had tried to dislodge was slipping. I forced myself up, my body aching. I looked at the ship through the window. It was still there, still fighting. I couldn't let the light die. I found a hammer in the toolbox, and with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I hammered the gear back into place. The rhythm of the light became steady again, its beam sweeping across the sea in a solid, hopeful arc. I pulled the door shut, bracing it with a metal drum. Then I went down the stairs, one step at a time, locking every door behind me. I went into the galley, sat at the table, and waited. The storm raged for 2 more days. In all that time, I did not sleep. I just sat and listened and went up periodically to check the light. It kept turning. I kept it alive. When the storm finally broke, the sky was an almost painful blue. The sea was calm again, with only a gentle swell breaking on the rocks as if nothing had happened. In the afternoon, I saw a Coast Guard cutter approaching. I was saved. They asked me about David. I told them the truth. A rogue wave had taken him. They nodded with grim understanding. The sea takes its own. They didn't need to know the rest. I left Blackledge Point the next day and never returned. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I look out my window and see a distant light blinking on the horizon, I no longer feel safety or hope. I only feel the cold of the deep water, and I remember David's eyes. And I wonder, in his madness, if he was right. If all we are doing is delaying the inevitable, shining a fragile beam into an endless, hungry darkness.